At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe's armies were preparing for war, but their vision of battle was still trapped in the past. The great powers hadn't faced each other in a full-scale conflict since the days of Napoleon. In those days, strategy revolved around movement, speed, and shock. Cavalry, mounted soldiers on thundering horses, were seen as the ultimate weapon. These were the elite troops who could tear through enemy lines with a single charge. Infantry marched in rigid formations, their bright uniforms a bold declaration of national pride. Discipline and courage mattered more than stealth or strategy. Firepower existed, but it was slow, deliberate, almost quaint by modern standards. Rifles needed careful reloading, and artillery, though powerful, mainly supported forward advances. It couldn't dominate the battlefield from afar. At the beginning of World War I, European governments and generals anticipated that any coming war would be fought as it always had been. But this vision was outdated. The Industrial Revolution had quietly transformed the tools and systems of war. New technologies such as rapid-fire weapons, modern explosives, mechanized transport and engines capable of flight had emerged faster than doctrine could adapt. The old world of heroic offensives came up against the modern world of industrial warfare. This clash created a new, destructive kind of stalemate, and the result would shake the foundations of the 20th century. In early modern times, wars fought on land followed a rigid and unforgiving formula. Armies assembled in open fields, soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in long, ordered lines. The distance between opposing armies rarely exceeded 100 yards as they fired directly into one another. Commanders often ordered a single, thunderous volley of firing. When the firing ceased, they would unleash a bayonet charge. It was during these charges that casualties were most severe. The musket was the dominant weapon of warfare during the early modern period. The musket's greatest strength lay in its versatility. It was both a firearm and, when fitted with a bayonet, it became a close combat weapon. In battle, the musket could become a spear. Accuracy, however, wasn't a strong point for the musket. They were woefully unreliable when firing at a target beyond 100 yards. Muskets were also limited. Trained soldiers could fire only 3 to 4 shots per minute before they had to stop and reload. Reloading the musket took on average 15 to 20 seconds. In those few seconds, soldiers were vulnerable to enemy attacks. It was during those moments that bayonet use often meant survival. By World War I, the musket had become outdated technology. The rifle, which emerged somewhere around the 15th century and was refined over the years, became the standard issue among the infantry. While its maximum range extended to approximately 2,280 meters, its effective killing range was closer to 500 meters. In the hands of a well-trained infantryman, the rifle could deliver up to 15 accurate rounds per minute. Heavy machine guns were another technological advancement that dominated the battlefield. Derived from Hiram Maxim's late 19th century design, the machine gun did not simply influence the First World War. It reshaped it. With its ability to deliver rapid, sustained firepower, the machine gun turned traditional infantry charges into near-certain death. Advancing across open ground was no longer a matter of courage or discipline. It was a death sentence. To survive, armies dug trenches into the earth. Trench warfare became the defining feature of the conflict, carving the Western Front into a scarred landscape of opposing lines separated by deadly stretches of no man's land. In this new battlefield, the advantage shifted decisively to the defender. Any attempt to cross open ground was met with overwhelming fire, producing prolonged stalemates and casualty figures on a scale the world had never before seen. Open field battles were now impossible. To break the deadlock, militaries were forced to innovate, deploying massive artillery barrages and experimenting with new and deadly tactics. By 1915, World War I reached a deadly stalemate. Trenches stretched for miles, and conventional weapons had failed to deliver a decisive breakthrough. In this environment of desperation, military planners turned to science for a new solution. By 1916, the challenge of trench warfare demanded a technological breakthrough. That breakthrough arrived in the form of the tank. Designed to move across rough terrain and provide protective mobility, tanks were deployed initially in limited numbers but quickly demonstrated their strategic potential. Through continued refinement, stronger armor, improved engines, and coordinated use, tanks began to support larger offensives and restore movement to the battlefield. Their arrival marked the beginning of mechanized land warfare, redefining the future of military operations. Chemical weapons were not an accidental development. In the years before the war, European chemists, particularly in Germany, had already begun experimenting with toxic industrial gases. What changed in World War I was the decision to weaponize them on an unprecedented scale. On April the 22nd, 1915, near Ypres in Belgium, the modern age of chemical warfare began. German forces released more than 150 tons of chlorine gas from pressurized cylinders, allowing the wind to carry the deadly cloud toward French colonial troops who were holding the line. They were unprotected and unprepared. The soldiers inhaled the gas, which burned the lungs and caused suffocation. Entire sections of the front collapsed within minutes, not from gunfire, but from panic and choking. The initial success shocked the world, but it also opened the door to escalation. Soon, all major powers began developing their own chemical weapons. Chlorine was followed by phosgene, a deadlier gas that often caused delayed death hours after exposure. Then came mustard gas. First used in 1917, this blistering agent did not always kill, but left victims blinded, burned, and permanently injured. Gas attacks did not always result in mass fatalities, but their strategic impact was enormous. They could incapacitate entire units without a single shot being fired, contaminate battlefields for days, and terrorize soldiers who never knew when the next cloud might roll in. Gas masks became as essential as rifles, and fear became a constant companion in the trenches. Chemical warfare did not break the stalemate, but it permanently changed how war was fought, proving that in World War I, science could be as lethal as steel. When World War I began in 1914, military medicine was shockingly unprepared for the kind of war that was about to unfold. Industrial warfare introduced devastating weapons, machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas, and high-explosive shells. The result was injuries doctors had never seen before. At the beginning of the war, many wounded soldiers died not from their injuries, but from infection afterwards. One of the most deadly threats was gangrene, a bacterial infection that could destroy tissue within hours. Amputation was often the only way to save a life. Doctors quickly realized that traditional medical methods were no longer enough. If medicine did not evolve quickly, millions more would die. One of the most revolutionary advances of World War I came from the need to treat horrific facial injuries. Shrapnel and bullets often destroyed soldiers' faces, jaws, and noses. Survival left many men severely disfigured. A pioneering surgeon named Harold Gillies began developing new techniques to reconstruct damaged faces. Working in hospitals in Britain, Gillies performed thousands of experimental operations. He invented the tube pedicle skin graft, a technique that moved living skin from one part of the body to another while maintaining its blood supply. It was revolutionary. For the first time, surgeons could rebuild faces. These innovations became the foundation of modern plastic and reconstructive surgery used today for burn victims, accident survivors, and cancer patients. Another life-saving breakthrough came from the challenge of blood loss. Many soldiers died from hemorrhage before reaching a hospital. Before World War I, blood transfusions were extremely rare, but the war forced doctors to move transfusion from theory to practice. Soon, doctors developed methods to store blood using sodium citrate, which prevented clotting. This meant blood could be stored and transported. The first blood banks began to appear. By the end of the war, blood transfusion had become a critical medical procedure. Another challenge was simple but deadly: getting wounded soldiers to medical care fast enough. Early in the war, injured men often lay on the battlefield for hours or even days. Many died before reaching a doctor. This changed with the development of organized ambulance services. Motorized ambulances began replacing horse-drawn carts. Volunteer drivers, including many women, risked their lives driving through artillery fire to retrieve wounded soldiers. One famous organization involved in these efforts was the American Red Cross, which helped train drivers and support battlefield medical transport. These efforts helped establish the modern emergency evacuation system used today by paramedics and trauma teams. Perhaps the greatest enemy on the battlefield was infection. Mud, manure, and bacteria contaminated nearly every wound. A British scientist named Alexander Fleming, who later discovered penicillin, served as an army doctor during the war. He observed that many antiseptics used at the time actually damaged healthy tissue and made infections worse. Meanwhile, French surgeon Alexis Carrel and chemist Henry Dequin developed a new method to fight infection. The Carrel-Dequin method used a special antiseptic solution to continuously flush wounds. This dramatically reduced infection and saved countless lives. These innovations laid the groundwork for modern surgical sterilization and wound care. Not all injuries were physical. World War I also forced doctors to confront psychological trauma. Thousands of soldiers suffered from a mysterious condition known as shell shock. Symptoms included tremors, nightmares, paralysis, and severe anxiety. Today, we recognize this condition as post-traumatic stress disorder. Although treatment was primitive at the time, the war marked the beginning of serious research into combat trauma and mental health. It was one of the first steps toward modern psychological medicine. World War I ended in 1918, but its technological legacy continued far beyond the armistice. The conflict demonstrated that industrial power determined military success. Technology shaped strategy and survival. Warfare would never again rely on outdated methods or limited firepower. The world entered the 20th century expecting familiar battles. It emerged from the Great War confronted by modern warfare, from machine guns to tanks, from chemical warfare to medical advances. These innovations reshaped national defense, global politics, and the responsibilities of modern nations. The technology of World War I did not just change the outcome of a conflict. It altered the course of history. The First World War was not only a clash of armies, it was a test of systems that reshaped the very nature of our world today.